Tuesday evenings at Sunset Manor usually follow the same predictable rhythm. Dinner ends promptly at 6:30. Residents shuffle to the common room, where the evening news drones from the mounted television, and by 8 o'clock sharp, most have retreated to their rooms for the night. The routine is comfortable, reliable, a gentle metronome, marking the passage of days for people who have earned their rest. But some evenings, the rhythm changes. Frank Martinez pushed back from his half-finished plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, his fork clinking against the ceramic as thunder rumbled ominously in the distance. The dining hall's large. Windows revealed darkening clouds rolling across the valley like an advancing army. "That thunder's getting closer," he remarked to his usual table mates, Earl, Tom, and Hank, the unlikely brotherhood that had formed over months of shared meals and gradually shared stories. "Reminds me of monsoon season back in." A brilliant crack of lightning split the sky, illuminating the dining hall in stark electric blue. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, but the weak amber glow transformed the familiar space into something foreign and uncertain. Earl Thompson, never one to let a moment pass without commentary, grinned broadly in the dim light. "Well, I'll be damned. 63 years since I've been in a blackout. That wasn't planned by the power company." Tom Bradley, methodical as always, looked up from his coffee cup with the measured expression of a man assessing a situation. "Speak for yourself, Earl. Just last month, when they were working on the transformer outside Building C, the power died completely mid-sentence, as if the storm itself had decided to punctuate his point. The emergency lights hummed softly, casting everything in that peculiar amber twilight that made faces look both younger and older simultaneously. In the sudden dimness, something shifted in the atmosphere of Sunset Manor. Not just the lighting, but something deeper and more fundamental. The usual dinner conversation, complaints about the weather, updates on grandchildren's achievements, gentle debates about television programs died away, replaced by a different kind of quiet. This wasn't the silence of people with nothing to say, but rather the expectant hush of individuals recognizing that something significant was about to unfold. Hank Williams, usually the most reserved member of their group, spoke quietly into the gathering stillness. His voice carried a note of recognition that the others immediately understood. "Well, gentlemen, looks like we're camping indoors tonight." The simple statement seemed to release something in the room. Without discussion or planning, residents began moving with surprising purpose through the hallways. The emergency lighting cast long, wavering shadows that seemed to guide their steps toward the common room. It was as if some collective instinct, dormant for decades, had suddenly awakened. The common room had always been the heart of Sunset Manor, a place where residents gathered for activities, watched television, or simply sat in companionable silence with their newspapers. But tonight, bathed in the uncertain glow of emergency lighting, it felt transformed into something more significant. A gathering place for when the familiar becomes uncertain, when routine gives way to the unexpected. Janet Rodriguez, one of the evening staff members, appeared like an angel of mercy carrying a battery-powered camping lantern. Her usual efficiency was tinged with the kind of calm competence that comes from years of managing minor crises in institutional settings. "I've got this for you, gentlemen," she announced, setting the lantern down on the central coffee table where it immediately became a beacon. "We're working on getting the generator running, but the repair technician says it might be a while." The storm knocked out power to half the county. Frank accepted the lantern with the gratitude of someone who understood the difference between mere illumination and actual light. "Much obliged, Janet. We've made do with considerably less." Earl settled into his customary chair with a grunt of satisfaction. That suggested he was already adapting to the evening's altered circumstances. Considerably less is right. Remember that forward outpost near Da Nang, where we had one candle stub between 8 of us, and Rodriguez, not you, Janet. Different Rodriguez kept insisting we save it for real emergencies. Tom chuckled, his coffee cup still warm in his hands. "That wasn't a candle, Earl. That was a piece of bootlace. Somebody dipped in bacon grease and called illumination." Their gentle laughter seemed to act as a signal, drawing other residents like moths to flame. The sound of genuine amusement in the amber-lit space created an atmosphere that felt both intimate and welcoming. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson from room 2B appeared first, clutching her cream-colored cardigan against the slight chill that always seemed to accompany power outages. She moved with the careful dignity of someone who had learned to navigate uncertainty with grace, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the evening's disruptions. Mr. Carlos Rodriguez followed close behind, his usual reluctance to join group activities, apparently overcome by the unusual circumstances. In 6 months of residence, Frank had rarely seen the retired carpenter participate in communal activities, but tonight he shuffled directly to an empty spot on the couch as if he'd been expected all along. The Kowalski twins, Martha and Rose, 83 years old and still finishing each other's sentences, arrived together as they did everything else. Their synchronized movements and shared glances spoke of a lifetime spent in perfect partnership, a harmony that the evening's disruption couldn't disturb. Soon, the common room held more residents than Frank had ever seen, gathered in one place during his months at Sunset Manor. The weak emergency lighting and the warm glow of Janet's lantern created an atmosphere that seemed to dissolve the usual social boundaries between acquaintances and strangers. Earl Thompson, ever practical despite his reputation for wisecracks, reached into his jacket pocket and produced a pack of peanut butter crackers. The simple gesture carried the weight of ritual as he tore open the cellophane wrapper with deliberate ceremony. "Well, since we're camping," he announced to the gathered circle, "anybody want to share field rations?" Tom Bradley accepted the offered cracker with the solemn appreciation of someone who understood the significance of shared resources in uncertain times. He bit into it thoughtfully, his expression suggesting careful evaluation of its nutritional merits. "Field rations, Earl? I've eaten genuine K rations that had more flavor than these things. At least those came with cigarettes and chocolate bars." Frank Martinez took his own cracker and delivered his assessment with the perfectly timed deadpan humor that had made him popular among his fellow residents. "At least these don't glow in the dark like that canned meat we got in basic training. The laughter that followed wasn't merely polite social interaction, it was the deeper recognition of shared experience. These men had all been young soldiers, once, choking down food that barely qualified as nourishment, grateful simply to have something in their stomachs when hunger was the alternative. From across the room, Mrs. Patterson's voice carried the tentative hope of someone offering a small treasure. I have marshmallows in my purse. Only half a bag left from my granddaughter's visit last week, but they're still fresh. The simple offer seemed to break down invisible barriers. Mr. Rodriguez, surprising everyone with his participation, spoke up from his corner of the couch. Coffee packets. Instant, but it's still coffee. Got a whole handful from the dining room. What followed was nothing short of miraculous in its organic beauty. The coffee table transformed before their eyes, from a simple piece of furniture into an altar of community generosity. Crackers appeared alongside marshmallows. Packets of sugar emerged from jacket pockets saved from lunch by residents who had learned during harder times never to waste anything potentially useful. A few peppermints materialized from the depths of purses, along with a half roll of butterscotch candies that someone's daughter had brought during visiting hours. It wasn't much by any objective measure, certainly nothing that would qualify as a proper meal. But in the warm circle of the lantern's glow, surrounded by the gentle sound of rain beginning to fall against the windows, it felt like everything they needed. In the growing warmth of shared resources and gentle conversation, something unexpected happened. Hank Williams, the quiet man who rarely spoke above, a whisper during normal circumstances, began to hum. At first, it was barely audible, a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to emerge from some deep well of memory. Sound off. Frank's head snapped up with the sharp attention of recognition. Hank, is that? Hank's voice grew stronger and more confident, as if the familiar cadence was awakening, something that had been sleeping for decades. 1, 2, sound off. Earl's eyes lit up with the same recognition, and his voice joined the growing chorus. 3, 4. Tom couldn't resist adding his own contribution. Cadence count. And then all 4 voices merged in perfect unison, their words carrying the weight of shared military experience. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. 3, 4. Hank had always been the quietest member of their informal group. In 6 months of shared meals and conversations, Frank had barely heard him string together more than a few sentences at a time. But now, his voice carried something ancient and, sure, the rhythm of marching feet, the cadence of shared purpose, the sound of young men far from home finding strength in unity. Mrs. Kowalski began clapping along, her face bright with recognition and delight. My Stanley used to sing that exact same song in the shower every morning. Drove me crazy for 47 years, but I'd give anything to hear it again. The lantern lights seemed to grow brighter, though nothing had physically changed about the small camping device Janet had provided. Perhaps it was the way the light caught the animated faces around the circle. Or maybe it was simply that something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of the room. The careful politeness of institutional living, that delicate social dance required when strangers are thrust together by circumstance, rather than choice, fell away completely. In its place emerged something Frank hadn't experienced in decades: the easy, unguarded camaraderie of people who recognized in each other not just fellow residents or table mates, but genuine companions. Between verses of half-remembered military songs, Earl's voice took on the reflective tone of someone accessing memories he hadn't shared in years. You know what this reminds me of? That Christmas back in '68, when our supply convoy got delayed for 3 days running. Seems like supply convoys were always getting delayed, for one reason or another. Hank surprised everyone with his newfound boldness, his voice carrying clearly across the circle. The one where Sergeant Anderson made us sing Christmas carols to earn our rations. Frank's laughter was rich with rediscovered memory, the sound of a man reconnecting with a younger version of himself. Anderson, I haven't thought about him in probably 20 years. That man could make you drop for 50 push-ups just by looking at you sideways. Christmas of '68, Earl continued, his eyes growing distant with the particular look people get when they're seeing the past superimposed on the present. We'd been eating cold sea rations for 3 straight days because the supply convoy got stuck in that monsoon mud about 15 miles out. Hank nodded, his confidence growing with each shared memory. Anderson lines us all up outside the mess tent. And can you believe it actually snowed that year? In Vietnam, of all places. And he says in that Brooklyn accent of his, "Gentlemen, Santa's sleigh has been delayed due to enemy activity, but the old man managed to get through after all." Frank picked up the thread seamlessly, as if the four men were weaving a single tapestry from their collective recollections. But then he gets that grin. You remember that grin, Earl? Like he knew something the rest of us didn't, and pulls back the canvas flap to reveal the most beautiful sight we'd seen in months. Hot turkey, Tom said, real mashed potatoes, even cranberry sauce from actual cans. But there was a catch, Earl chuckled, shaking his head at the memory. There was always a catch with Anderson. He says, each table sings one Christmas carol. Best performance gets first serving and seconds if they want them. Worst performance gets to pull kitchen duty through New Year's Day. Hank's entire face had transformed with the telling of the story. Animation, replacing his usual reserved demeanor. You should have seen 8 grown men trying to remember the words to Silent Night, while their stomachs were growling loud enough to give away our position to enemy scouts. Johnson's table tried to do Jingle Bells in 4-part harmony, Frank added, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. Sounded like a pack of wounded coyotes. Those poor kids ended up scrubbing pots and pans until January 15th. Mrs. Patterson, who had been listening with the rapt attention of someone absorbing every detail, leaned forward in her chair. What did your table sing? The 4 veterans exchanged glances, suddenly looking remarkably like the young soldiers. They had once been a transformation that seemed to occur whenever they accessed these particular memories. I'll be home for Christmas, Hank said quietly, his voice carrying a note of vulnerability that hadn't been there moments before. Frank here had the best voice among us, though he spent most of basic training trying to hide it. Anderson made him sing lead, while the rest of us hummed the harmony. Frank's cheeks reddened slightly, but he didn't deny the assessment. I wasn't trying to show off or anything. I was just homesick, thinking about my mother's Christmas cookies and wondering if I'd ever taste them again, if I'd ever see another Christmas morning in my own house. We all were, Earl said gently, his usual humor tempered by genuine emotion. That song wasn't just about winning the hot food. It was about holding on to something from home, when we were 10,000 miles away from everything familiar. Eleanor's voice carried thoughtful curiosity. Did you win the competition? Frank's smile held both triumph and something deeper. Anderson declared it a tie between all the tables, said we all deserved a proper Christmas dinner, and anyone who could sing about home with that much genuine heart had already won something more important than first place in the chow line. The room fell into a comfortable quiet, each person lost in their own memories of Christmases past, some from decades of civilian celebrations, others from times when simple gestures of humanity meant the difference between despair and hope. Mr. Miller, emboldened by the inclusive atmosphere and the obvious appreciation for personal stories, offered his own contribution to the evening's sharing. I was never in military service 4F classification due to my hearing, but this whole thing reminds me of the night my restaurant lost power during Hurricane Eleanor back in '85. His voice grew stronger as he continued, clearly pleased to have something relevant to contribute. We had a full house when the lights went out, but instead of sending everyone home, we fired up every gas burner we had and cooked everything in the walk-in cooler before it could spoil. Fed the whole neighborhood for free that night, customers, neighbors, even the cops working the storm detail. Mrs. Patterson's voice grew soft with her own recollection. I remember that hurricane. My late husband David was a paramedic with the county. Service worked 3 straight days without coming home. When he finally made it back, he looked like he'd been through a war himself. Frank's response came gently, with the weight of understanding earned through his own service. Different uniforms, same dedication to serving something larger than yourself. In that moment, Frank realized something profound about the nature of the community that had formed around Janet's camping lantern, the brotherhood he had been unconsciously searching for since arriving at sunset. Manor wasn't exclusively about shared military service or matching uniforms. It was about recognizing in others the same commitment to serving something beyond personal interest, whether that service was rendered to country, community, family, or simply to the stranger sitting beside you when the lights went out. The power chose that moment to flicker back to life, fluorescent lights buzzing harshly as they struggled to illuminate the common room. After the warm, intimate glow of the lantern, the institutional lighting felt brutal and unwelcome, exposing every worn spot in the carpet, every scuff mark on the furniture, every line and wrinkle that the gentler light had softened into character. Several people groaned audibly at the transition, and someone, Frank thought it might have been Mr. Miller, actually said, "Turn those damn things off." As if in response to the collective wish, the lights flickered once more and died again, plunging them back into the amber warmth of the emergency system and Janet's faithful lantern. The timing was so perfect that everyone laughed, a sound of genuine delight at what felt like cosmic cooperation with their evening's transformation. Tom Bradley stood slowly, his movement carrying the deliberate dignity of someone preparing to make an important speech. In the months since Frank had known him, Tom had revealed himself to be a natural leader, the kind of man others instinctively turned to when decisions needed to be made or difficult conversations needed to be navigated. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tom began, his voice carrying easily across the circle of faces, "what happened here tonight wasn't merely coincidence. The storm was certainly unplanned, but this," he gestured around the room, encompassing the gathered residents, the shared food, the stories that had woven them together into something resembling family. This was something we needed whether we knew it or not. Frank felt compelled to encourage him. "Go on, Tom. I propose we make this a regular tradition. Once a month, let's say the third Tuesday of every month, we gather here in this room. We turn off the electric lights deliberately this time, bring whatever food we can contribute, and share our stories." The silence that followed wasn't empty or uncomfortable. Rather, it was full of consideration, of possibility, of recognition that something genuinely important was being offered to each of them. Earl Thompson broke the contemplative quiet with his gift for finding the perfect phrase, "rations and remembrance." Tom's entire face lit up with satisfaction. "Exactly. Rations and remembrance." Mrs. Patterson's voice carried a note of playful challenge that reminded everyone she had been a teacher for 37 years and was accustomed to managing group dynamics. "Can the ladies join this veterans club you're forming?" Hank Williams, whose transformation from silent observer to confident participant had been one of the evening's most remarkable developments, responded without hesitation, "Ma'am, anyone who has ever served their family, their community, their country, or just the person sitting next to them is welcome at this table." The simple statement carried such obvious sincerity that it seemed to settle the matter completely. Frank looked around the circle of faces, illuminated by the steady glow of Janet's camping lantern, and felt something he hadn't experienced since his discharge. Papers were signed decades earlier. He was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by people who understood not just where he had been, but who he was trying to become. The power returned for good with an anticlimactic electrical hum, fluorescent lights flickering to life and revealing the common room in all its institutional reality. Brown commercial carpeting showed every worn traffic pattern. Beige walls displayed their scuff marks and nail holes. Furniture that prioritized durability over comfort sat arranged in the rigid patterns deemed most efficient for cleaning crews. But something fundamental had changed, that no amount of harsh electric lighting could diminish or erase. The people gathered in that circle had seen past the surface of their shared living situation to something much more substantial, the possibility of genuine community built on mutual respect, shared experience, and the simple human need for connection. Janet Rodriguez reappeared, looking slightly frazzled by her evening of crisis. "Management, looks like we're back online permanently, folks. Sorry about the inconvenience the repair crew finally got. The main transformer working again." Frank spoke for the entire group when he replied, "No inconvenience at all, Janet. Sometimes the best things happen when plans get disrupted. Earl stood and stretched with theatrical exaggeration, but his words carried genuine appreciation. Best dinner entertainment we've had since I moved in here. Tom addressed the group with the satisfaction of someone who had accomplished something meaningful. Same time next month then? Third Tuesday, 7 o'clock. The chorus of agreement was immediate and enthusiastic. Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it. Looking forward to it already. As the group began to disperse, residents heading back to their rooms, with the satisfied tiredness that comes from an unexpectedly fulfilling evening, Frank lingered in the common room. The harsh fluorescent lights revealed the space in all its institutional plainness, but he found himself seeing it with completely different eyes. This wasn't simply a way station between more interesting places, a room where residents killed time between meals and medical appointments. Tonight had transformed it into something approaching sacred ground, a place where stories were shared honestly, where connections were forged between people who had every reason to remain strangers, where the simple act of offering a marshmallow could become a gesture of profound generosity. Walking slowly down the hallway toward his room, Frank's mind wandered through the evening's revelations and recognitions. There was something both humbling and exhilarating about discovering community in the most unlikely circumstances, about finding that the capacity for new friendships hadn't diminished with age, but had simply been waiting for the right opportunity to flourish. Funny thing about finding your tribe, he reflected as he paused outside his door to look back toward the common room. You spend most of your life thinking it happens once in school or military service or that first job, where strangers become colleagues, become friends. You never imagine it could happen again, especially not at 76 years old, especially not in a place where people supposedly come to wait out their remaining years. But Frank wasn't waiting anymore. None of them were really. They were actively living, consciously sharing, deliberately remembering, and more importantly, they were creating new memories to carry forward into whatever time remained to them. The storm had knocked out more than electrical power. It had somehow managed to knock down the invisible walls. People build around their hearts when they've been disappointed too often or hurt too deeply. He turned his key in the lock, smiling at the thought that had been circling in his mind since Tom's proposal, Rations and Remembrance. Tom Bradley had found the perfect words to capture what they were. Trying to build together. In military service, you learn to make do with whatever resources were available. Here at Sunset Manor, they were learning to make the most of what they had found in each other, which turned out to be far more valuable than any of them had initially recognized. Outside, the storm had moved on toward the east, leaving behind air that felt clean and charged with possibility. Inside the quiet hallways of Sunset Manor, the seeds of something beautiful had been planted during those few hours without electric light, a monthly tradition that would become legendary among residents, a gathering that would outlast many of its original founders, and a reminder that the most meaningful human connections often emerge when we least expect them and most need them. The camping lantern had been packed away until next month, but the light it had kindled in a room full of hearts would continue burning for years to come, and Frank Martinez, falling asleep that night with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in decades, knew that the third Tuesday of next month couldn't possibly arrive soon enough.